I wasn't looking for anything when Nate moved in. Just someone to split the rent. That's it. My last roommate had bailed mid-lease, leaving me with bills I could barely cover on a teacher's salary, so when Nate responded to the ad and didn't seem like a total disaster, I said yes before he even finished his second sentence. He moved in on a cloudy Saturday afternoon with 2 duffel bags, a stack of books, and a Keurig machine. That was it. I remember thinking, damn, he travels light. He was quiet. Polite. A little awkward in a way that wasn't off-putting. Just careful, like he didn't want to take up too much space. He had this habit of clearing his throat before speaking, especially when he wasn't sure what to say. His laugh was low and hesitant, like it was still testing the room. And he smelled faintly like citrus soap and clean laundry. I noticed that way too early. The first few weeks were unremarkable. We settled into our routines. I taught high school English during the day and graded papers at night. He was finishing his last semester in a nursing program and worked weekends at the hospital. We'd nod at each other in the kitchen, share the occasional meal if our schedules overlapped. How was your day? Long. Want the last slice of pizza? Nah, go for it. Nothing deep, nothing emotional, but something about having him there made the apartment feel less sterile. My previous roommate had been loud, messy, and into throwing pre-game parties that left the place smelling like beer and Axe. With Nate, things were calm, peaceful. I found myself looking forward to his key turning in the lock at the end of the day, like the quiet was only enjoyable when I knew he'd eventually break it. One night in early November, he came home soaked from the rain, shivering and frustrated because his umbrella had broken on the bus. I tossed him a hoodie from the clean laundry pile, one of my oldest and softest, and he pulled it on with a grateful sigh. "Smells like your detergent," he mumbled. "Too much lavender? No, it's kind of nice." That was the first time I realized he looked really good in my clothes. I pretended not to notice how the sleeves bunched at his wrists, or how he hugged the fabric around himself a little too long. We started hanging out more after that. Nothing major, just shared dinners, background noise from the same Netflix shows, those little domestic rituals that make life blur pleasantly. I found out he liked crossword puzzles and fell asleep with headphones in. He learned that I couldn't cook rice to save my life and had a bad habit of correcting grammar out loud during movies. Then came the tea. It sounds stupid, but it became a thing. I'd boil water before bed and leave a cup of chamomile by his door on nights when he worked late. No note, no explanation, just there. The first time I did it, he knocked softly on my door and said, "Thanks." The second time he said nothing, but I found his mug washed and dried beside the sink the next morning. Eventually, he started doing it too, making 2 cups and quietly placing one beside me on the coffee table when I was too absorbed in grading or reading to notice he'd made tea at all. We never talked about it, but those mugs became little anchors, proof that someone was thinking of the other. The tension crept in so gradually I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, but I was too careful to let myself acknowledge it. It was in the way we lingered longer in the kitchen, even when we had nothing left to say. The way our feet would brush under the table, and neither of us would move. The way he started sitting closer on the couch. Not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his thigh through my jeans. One Saturday morning, we both had the rare luxury of being off. I made pancakes. He brewed coffee. Music played softly from his phone, some acoustic playlist full of sad indie bands I'd never heard of, and for a moment, it felt like we were something. Like we had built a little quiet life together and just forgotten to label it. I handed him a plate, and his fingers brushed mine. He looked up and we both froze. Just for a second. It was so brief, so easily deniable, but it rattled me more than I wanted to admit. His eyes lingered on mine a moment too long, then darted away, and he cleared his throat like he always did when he was nervous. "Thanks," he said quietly, and we never spoke of it. From that morning on, things felt different. Not dramatically. Nothing changed on the surface. We still watched dumb cooking shows together and fought over who had to take out the recycling. But under it all, there was a new current humming between us, a kind of electricity. Low, steady, impossible to ignore. It was in the silences. The way they started to stretch. Not uncomfortable, just loaded. The kind of silence that made you hyper aware of how close someone was sitting, of the way their breath slowed when yours did. One night we were watching The Great British Bake Off. Nate had come in from a long shift at the hospital, smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. He didn't say much, just flopped onto the couch next to me and let out a low sigh. I handed him a blanket without a word. He pulled it over both of us. We'd never shared a blanket before, and again, no big deal, right? Roommates. Comfort. Cold apartment. But then halfway through the episode, his knee pressed against mine and didn't move. I felt his head tilt slightly toward my shoulder. Not resting there. Not yet. Just hovering. Close enough that if I shifted even slightly, we'd touch. I didn't move. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. The episode ended, and he sat up, blinking like he'd forgotten where he was. "Shit," he mumbled. "I have an early clinical." I nodded. My throat was suddenly dry. He stood and turned toward me like he wanted to say something else. His eyes flicked to my mouth, just for a second, and then he was gone, retreating to his room with a quiet, "Night, man." I didn't sleep much that night. After that, the small things became impossible to ignore. His hoodie joined the rotation of clothes he wore around the apartment, even though it was clearly mine. He stopped knocking when he came into my room to borrow something, and I stopped caring. He started cooking enough dinner for two without asking. I started waiting to eat until he got home. We developed a rhythm that felt more like a couple than roommates. But still, no one said anything. Until the night I got a date. It wasn't even a big deal. Just a guy the first met through a friend. He asked if I wanted to grab drinks. I said yes. Nate overheard the call while he was doing the dishes. "Friday?" he asked, not looking up from the sink. "Yeah," I said. "Some guy Matt knows. Nothing serious." He nodded, too slowly. The water kept running, even though his hands weren't moving. "Cool. Hope it goes well." That Friday, I got ready like it was just any other night. Shower, cologne, jacket I didn't wear often. I was halfway out the door when Nate emerged from the hallway. He looked different, tense. "Hey," he said, voice too casual. "Got plans tonight?" I paused. "Yeah, that thing I mentioned, the date." "Right," he scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, have fun." There was something behind his eyes, I couldn't place it. The date sucked. The guy was nice enough, but felt like talking to a LinkedIn profile. I left after one beer, said I had an early morning. When I got back, Nate was on the couch, still in the same clothes, half asleep with his head tipped back and one of my books open on his lap. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the faint crease between his brows. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I walked over and nudged his foot with mine. He startled awake, blinking fast. "Oh, hey, how was it?" I shrugged. "Fine." He waited. "I left early," I added. "Wasn't feeling it." Nate's mouth quirked into something that almost looked like a smile but didn't quite get there. "Shame." I sat down next to him, our knees brushing again. He didn't move away. "You waiting up for me?" I asked, half joking. He looked at me then, really looked. "Maybe." My heart kicked once in my chest. Loud. Stupid. We sat there in silence for a minute. 2. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That guy, if he had kissed you, would you have let him?" I turned toward him slowly. "Maybe." "Why?" Nate's eyes didn't leave mine. He was breathing a little heavier now, and I realized So was I. No reason, he said too fast. I didn't press. He didn't explain. After that night, I started noticing all the things Nate didn't say. He still made dinner like usual, still left tea at my door on late nights, still curled into the far end of the couch during our Netflix marathons. But there was a hesitation now, like every motion came with a second thought, like he was afraid of being too much. And maybe I was too. I caught myself doing it, watching him over the rim of my coffee mug, listening too carefully when he talked to his mom on the phone, catching the ghost of a smile when he laughed at something I said, and trying to burn the image into memory. He still wore that old hoodie of mine. I never asked for it back. One night in late November, the heat in our building went out. Typical old pipes and a landlord who never returned calls. I had just gotten home from work, jacket soaked through from walking in the cold drizzle, when I found Nate sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, typing on his laptop. "Freezing in here," he said without looking up. "Yeah," I replied, shaking off my coat. "No hot water either. Just what I needed." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the screen. I boiled water in the kettle and washed my face like I'm in some Victorian orphanage. That made me laugh, more than I expected to. "Come on," I said. "We'll freeze in our own rooms. Let's bundle up and crash in the living room." He blinked at me. "Like a sleepover?" I raised an eyebrow. "Sure, if we're calling it that." 15 minutes later, we had every blanket and pillow we owned piled onto the living room rug. We didn't plan it, but we both ended up laying side by side on the floor, half buried under the same comforter. The TV glowed quietly in the dark, some old comedy playing. Neither of us really watched it. It was late, too late. I rolled onto my side, facing him. "Warm enough?" He nodded. "Better now." His voice was soft. So was his face in the TV light. I thought about saying something. Anything. About that night on the couch. About the question he asked. About the weight sitting between us, growing heavier by the week. Instead, I just said, "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "It's nice like this." "Yeah," I said. "It is." A pause. "I like living with you," he said, voice low. I felt my pulse in my throat. Same. I wasn't sure what I expected after that. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But neither of us moved, and after a while, the silence folded itself around us again. In the middle of the night, I woke up to find his arm slung over my waist, his breath warm against the back of my neck. And I didn't move. The morning after we shared the living room blanket nest, I woke up to sunlight slanting through the blinds and the quiet sound of Nate making coffee. My back was cold where his arm had been hours earlier, and I wondered if he'd remembered it happening, or if it was just something his body had done in sleep. I sat up slowly, blinking in the light. He glanced over from the kitchen. "Hey," he said, like it was any other morning. No weirdness, no awkwardness, just hey. "Morning," I replied, my voice a little rough. He passed me a mug a few minutes later, and we sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee on the couch like two people who hadn't fallen asleep, practically spooning. But something had shifted, again. A quiet awareness, like our bodies remembered even if our words didn't. The heater came back on that afternoon, and we both returned to our separate bedrooms. But the wall between us felt thinner now, more symbolic than real. A week later, I came home to find him sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open textbooks and highlighters, muttering under his breath. "Studying?" I asked, dropping my bag. He sighed. "Trying. My brain is soup." I tossed him a wrapped chocolate bar from the grocery bag. "Here, emergency provisions." His face lit up. "You're my hero." I sat down next to him, shoulder to shoulder, scanning the mess of color-coded notes. "Cardiovascular pharmacology?" I asked, picking up one page. "Don't even say the words," he groaned, flopping back dramatically. I laughed. I didn't know nurses had to memorize this much. "We do if we want to pass." I swear, I've aged 10 years in 2 semesters. I looked at him. His hair was a mess, glasses slipping down his nose. But his mouth curved into a lazy, half-sleepy grin, and something about him in that moment made my chest ache in a way I couldn't fully explain. "You'll be a great nurse," I said quietly. He turned to look at me, something unreadable in his expression. "Thanks," he said, his voice just as soft. Another pause. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, suddenly serious. I knew what he meant. Me too. He nodded slowly, then looked down. "I keep wondering if I crossed a line." "You didn't," I said immediately. "You didn't do anything wrong." His gaze met mine again, searching. "I want to be careful," he said. "I like this. Us. I don't want to mess it up." "You're not messing anything up," I said. "I like this too." It was the closest we'd come to admitting it out loud. He let out a slow breath. "Okay." For a few moments, we just sat there, side by side, the silence deeper, but not heavier. I could feel the air thick with everything we hadn't said yet, but now at least we both knew it was there. Later that night, I passed by his room to find the door cracked open. He was inside, sitting cross-legged on his bed, hoodie sleeves pushed up, music playing softly from his laptop. Without thinking, I stepped into the doorway. He looked up. "Couldn't sleep?" "Not really." He patted the bed beside him. "Come in. Company helps." I hesitated only a second, then walked over and sat beside him. We didn't talk much, just listened to music. The kind that makes you feel things even if you don't have words for them. At one point, our hands brushed on the blanket between us. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. After that night in his room, things started to feel suspended. We didn't make a move. We didn't talk about anything serious, but we kept orbiting closer. The quiet tension between us stretched thin, like cling wrap over something fragile and unfinished. We still did all the same things. Ate takeout on the couch. Shared groceries. Took turns cleaning. On the outside, we were just two guys sharing an apartment. But under it all, there was something waiting. Something slow and warm and real. One Saturday afternoon in December, we decided to decorate the apartment for Christmas. Neither of us was big on holidays, but Nate found a box of decorations at a thrift store and insisted we make it festive. He bought a tiny fake tree, some dollar store lights, and a felt garland that spelled joy in crooked red letters. We strung the lights up around the living room window while Last Christmas played on his laptop. At one point, I was standing on the arm of the couch trying to tape the last strand of lights across the curtain rod when I felt his hand at my waist. "Careful," he said. "You're gonna fall and take me down with you." I looked over my shoulder. He was close, closer than usual. His hand stayed there, steady, warm through the fabric of my shirt. "You calling me clumsy?" I asked, smirking. "I'm calling you statistically likely to break your neck standing like that." I laughed, and he didn't move his hand. When I climbed down, our bodies brushed, my chest against his shoulder, his palm briefly sliding across my side. For a moment, we were nose to nose, breath mingling in that narrow space between decision and restraint. But then the moment passed. We didn't kiss. We didn't speak. He stepped back. I let him. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart thudding for reasons I didn't have the courage to admit yet. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, standing in his usual spot, frying eggs. "Coffee's on," he said, not looking up. "Thanks." He flipped an egg. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "You were quiet last night." I hesitated, just tired. He nodded, but I could feel him studying me out of the corner of his eye. Later that week, we had a snowstorm. Classes got canceled, the streets iced over, and the apartment turned into a little cocoon of warmth and quiet. We stayed in sweats, watched movies, drank too much hot cocoa. On the second night, we sat on the couch under the same blanket again. This time, our shoulders touched from the start. His hand rested near mine on the cushion. Not touching, but close enough to feel the heat. Midway through the movie, I felt his pinky graze mine. He didn't pull away, neither did I. Eventually, our fingers twined together, slow and unsure. I could feel the tremble in his hand, and probably he could feel mine. He didn't look at me. I didn't speak. But we stayed like that for the rest of the movie, our hands quietly, perfectly folded together under the blanket. By the time the credits rolled, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I just knew I didn't want to let go. We didn't talk about the hand-holding after it happened. There was no debrief, no "what does this mean?" conversation, just the echo of fingers laced under a blanket and the quiet agreement that something between us had changed, even if we weren't ready to name it yet. The next few days passed like a strange dream, familiar routines with unfamiliar weight. Every glance carried subtext, every silence felt fuller than it should have. And still, neither of us made the first move. Until one night, we both found ourselves awake well past midnight. I'd gotten up for water. He was already in the kitchen, sitting at the counter in pajama pants and that worn-out hoodie he never gave back. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. "Too much on my mind," I admitted. He nodded, eyes on his mug. "Me too," I leaned against the fridge. "What do you think about when you can't sleep?" Nate took a long sip of tea, then said, "Lately? You." The words hit me like an open window in winter. Unexpected, bracing, real. I blinked. "Yeah?" He nodded. "I try not to, but then I see your coffee mug, or your book on the table, or I hear your stupid humming in the shower." "My humming is not stupid," he smiled. "Okay, it's fine. Kind of charming, actually." We both laughed, but it was quieter now. Warmer. He looked up at me, eyes soft but steady. "I think about you, and I wonder what we're doing." I moved toward him slowly, drawn by something I wasn't even trying to fight anymore. "I wonder the same thing," I said. He swallowed. His voice dropped. "And what do you want us to be doing?" My hands were cold from the water glass. I set it down on the counter between us. I looked at him. "I want to stop wondering," I said. There was a moment, an inhale, a pause, the kind of silence that exists right before you finally let go. And then he leaned in. Our foreheads touched first, like we were testing the water. Then, slowly, deliberately, our lips met, soft, tentative, just once. Then again, the kiss wasn't perfect. It was nervous and hesitant and a little breathless, but it was real. When we pulled back, he didn't say anything. He just pressed his forehead against mine again, breathing slowly like he was trying to memorize the air between us. And for once, there was nothing to overthink. We stood there for a long time, saying everything in silence. Later, curled up on the couch under the same blanket as always, I rested my hand on his knee, and he leaned his head against my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe, finally, it was. Things didn't change overnight after that kiss. There was no dramatic declaration, no immediate reshuffling of our routines. We still did the dishes on alternating nights, still argued over whether the living room lamp was too bright, still watched TV on the same beat-up couch. But something in the air had shifted, finally. Now his hand would find mine while we watched movies, no hesitation. Now I'd feel him brush against me in the kitchen and not wonder if it meant something. We didn't hide it anymore. We didn't need to. The next morning, I remember waking up to the smell of coffee. Nate was in the kitchen, already dressed, hair still damp from the shower. When he saw me, he gave a half smile and slid a mug across the counter. "Didn't want to wake you," he said. "You didn't," I said, taking the coffee, fingers grazing his again. "Just didn't want to leave the couch," he chuckled. "We really slept there?" "Like two guys in denial," I said. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Still feel like we're in denial?" I shook my head. Not anymore. It was strange how quickly it all became normal. We didn't rush into labels. Didn't feel the need to post about it. It was just ours. This quiet, steady thing that had taken its time. Something we'd both grown into, without even realizing it. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me over the top of his book, that soft, half smile tugging at his lips, and every time, it made me feel like home wasn't a place. It was a person. One night, weeks later, we were sitting on the couch. Our couch. He had his legs across mine, laptop balanced on his thighs, scrolling through job applications now that graduation was close. He looked up. I was thinking, dangerous, he smirked. Very, but maybe after I graduate, if I get a job nearby, we keep this going. The apartment, us. I paused, heart flipping in that low, pleasant way it does when something feels exactly right. You want to renew the lease together? More than that, he said. I want to wake up next to you on a real bed. Maybe even get a place with decent water pressure and heating that works in winter. I laughed. Setting the bar high, huh? He reached for my hand. Just want more of this. More of you. I squeezed his fingers gently. Yeah, me too. That night, as I lay beside him in the same bed we used to sleep in separately, I thought about how quietly it all started. A roommate ad. A broken umbrella. A hoodie lent without a second thought. And now here we were, two people who took the long way to something real. No fireworks, no dramatic declarations. Just quiet, steady love. Exactly how it began.